Hello, sixth grade. We are on our second part of how to eat fried worms. I hope you enjoyed our first part. I thought it was kind of fun. We're at the part where Billy is getting ready to eat his worm. He, I think, anticipated a small worm, but if you'll remember, his friends chose a very big night crawler for him to eat. So we're picking up at chapter 4, the first worm. The huge night crawler sprawled limply in the center of the platter, brown and steaming. "Boiled," said Tom. "We boiled it." Billy stormed about the barn, kicking barrels and posts and arguing. "A night crawler isn't a worm. If it was a worm, it would be called a worm. A night crawler's a night crawler." Finally, Joe ran off to get his father's dictionary. And in the dictionary it read, "Night crawler, noun. Earthworm, a large earthworm found on the soil surface at night." Billy kicked a barrel. It wasn't fair. He didn't care what any dictionary said. Everybody knew the difference between a night crawler and a worm. Look at the thing. It was as big as a souvenir pencil from the Empire State Building. Ugh! He poked it with his finger. Alan said they'd agreed right at the start that he and Joe would choose the worm. If Billy was going to cheat, the bet was off. He got up and started for the door. He guessed he had other things to do besides argue all day with a Fink. So Tom took Billy aside into a horse stall and put his arm around Billy's shoulders and talked to him about George Cunningham's brother's mini bike. How they could ride it on the trail under the power lines behind Odell's farm, up and down the hills, bounding over rocks. Sure, it was a big worm, but it'd only be a couple of more bites. Did he want to lose a mini bike over 2 bites? Slap more mustard on, slap more ketchup on, and he wouldn't even taste it. Yeah, said Billy, I could possibly eat this one, but I've got to eat 15 of them. You can't quit now, said Tom. Look at them. He nodded at Alan and Joe, waiting beside the orange crates. They'll tell everybody you were chicken. It'll be all over school. Come on. He led Billy to the orange crates, sat down, tied the napkin around his neck. Alan flourished the knife and fork. Would Monsieur like it carved lengthwise or crosswise? Ketchup, said Joe, showing his teeth. Cut it out, said Tom. Here, he glopped ketchup and mustard and horseradish on the night crawler, squeezed on a few drops of lemon juice and salted and peppered it. Billy closed his eyes and opened his mouth. Put it in. Tom sliced off the end of the night crawler and forked it up. But just as he was about to poke it in Billy's open mouth, Billy closed his mouth and opened his eyes. No, let me do it. Tom handed him the fork. Billy gazed at the dripping ketchup and mustard, thinking, it's all right talking about eating worms, but doing it. Tom whispered in his ear, motorbike. Glug. Billy poked the fork into his mouth and chewed fiercely. Gulped, gulped, gulped. His eyes crossed, swam, squinched shut. He flapped his arms wildly, and then opening his eyes, he grinned at Tom. Superb, Gaston. Tom cut another piece, ketchuped, mustard, salted, peppered, horseradished, and lemoned it, and handed the fork to Billy. And Billy slugged it down, smacking his lips. And so they proceeded, now sprinkling on cinnamon and sugar, or a bit of cheese, some cracker crumbs, until there was nothing on the plate but a few stray dabs of ketchup and mustard. Well, said Billy, standing up and wiping his mouth with his napkin. So, are we done with the first course? Let me look in your mouth, said Alan. Yeah, said Joe. See if he swallowed it all. Certainly, said Billy. Look as long as you want to. Alan and Joe scrutinized the inside of his mouth. Okay, said Tom. Leave him alone now. Come on. 1 down, but 14 to go. How'd it taste, said Alan. Good, said Billy. Very fine, very fine. He flapped his arms like a big bird and began to hop down around the barn crying, Good, very fine, very fine. Alan and Joe and Tom looked worried. Yeah, good. How are you feeling, Billy? Tom asked. Yeah, stop flapping around and come tell us how you're feeling, said Joe. They huddled together by the orange crate as Billy hopped around and around them, flapping his arms. Good, good, very fine, very fine. Hoo, hoo. Alan whispered, he's crackers. Joe edged toward the door. Don't let him see we're afraid. Crazy people act like dogs. If they see you're afraid, they'll attack you. It couldn't be, whispered Tom, standing his ground. One worm? Good, good, screeched Billy, hopping higher and higher and drooling from the mouth. Come on, whispered Joe to Tom. Hey, Billy, burst out Tom suddenly in a hearty, quavering voice. Cut it out, will you? I want to ask you something. Billy's arms flapped slower. He tiptoed menacingly toward Tom. His head cocked at one side, his cheeks puffed out. Tom hugged himself, chuckling nervously. Hey, hey, cut it out, will you, Billy? Billy pounced. Joe and Alan fled, the barn door banging beside them. Billy rolled on the floor, helpless with laughter. Tom clambered up, brushing himself off. Did you see their faces? Billy said, laughing, climbing over each other out of the door. Joe was as pale as an onion. Yeah, said Tom. Ha ha, you fooled them. Billy sat up. Then he crawled over to the door and peered out through the knothole. Look at them peeking up over the stone wall. Watch this. The door swung open slowly. Screeching, Billy hopped onto the doorsill, into the yard, up onto a stump, splash into a puddle, flapping his arms, rolling his head. Alan and Joe galloped up the hill through the high grass, yelling, Here he comes! Get out of the way! And then Billy stopped hopping and climbing, calling in a shrill, girlish voice, Oh, boys, where are you going? I've something for you, little boys. Alan and Joe stopped and looked back. Who's scared, you lunk, called Alan. Yeah, yelled Joe. I guess I can go home without being called scared if I want to. But ain't it too awful? I'm sorry, I can't read this typing. But ain't you in an awful hurry, shouted Billy. I just remembered I was supposed to help my mother wash windows this afternoon, said Alan. That's all. He turned and started through the meadow, his hands in his pockets. Yeah, said Joe. Me too. He trudged after Alan. Chapter 5, The Gathering Storm. By the way, I hope you like my headband. I thought it looked fun for today. Alan and Joe stopped in the orchard by the pile of fresh dirt. You think he'll be able to do it? Asked Alan, biting his thumbnail. I don't know, said Joe. He can't do it, said Alan. How could anybody eat 15 worms? My father would kill me. $50? He ate one, and it seemed awful easy. Forget it, said Joe. If he doesn't give up himself, I'll figure something out. We could spike the next worm with pepper. He'd eat one piece and then another, talking to Tom. Then all of a sudden he'd sneeze. Achoo! Then he'd sneeze again. Achoo! Then again. Achoo! Achoo! A faint look of panic would creep over his face. He'd begin to wonder if he'll ever stop. He clutches his stomach, his eyes beginning to water. Achoo! Achoo! Billy's awful stubborn, said Alan. Even if it was killing him, he might not give up. He falls to the floor. I bend over him. I say, call his mother. His eyes bleed up at me. Achoo! Remember that business last summer, said Alan, gnawing on his thumbnail, when it was 95 degrees in the shade and I dared him to put on all his winter clothes and his father's raccoon coat and his ski boots and walk up and down Main Street all afternoon. Achoo! Achoo! They went off through the orchard, Joe sneezing, rolling his eyes, pretending to be Billy, suffering from a dose of peppered worm. Alan moaning to himself about how stubborn Billy could be and about maybe him losing $50. Chapter 6, The Second Worm. Here we go. 14 to go if he does this one. Billy sighed. On the plate before him lay the last bite of worm under a daub of ketchup and mustard. What's the matter? Asked Tom. I don't know, sighed Billy. He picked up the fork again. Does it taste bad? Said Billy wearily. No, said Billy wearily. I just taste ketchup and mustard mostly, but it makes me feel sort of sick even before I eat it. It's just the thought of it. He sighed again and then glanced at Joe and Alan talking to each other in whispers by the window. What are you whispering about? Nothing. Then what are you whispering for? Nothing. It's not important. Just something Joe's father told him last night. What? Come on, finish up. It was nothing. We'll miss the cartoons. Billy shut his eyes and popped the last piece of worm into his mouth, chewed, gagged, clapped his hands over his mouth, gulp, gulp, and toppled backward off the orange crate, sprawling on his back in the chuff. He gazed peacefully up at the ceiling. Joe and Tom stood over him. Open up. Billy opened his mouth. Wider. See any, Joe? Nah, he swallowed it. Okay, let's go. Second worm down. This is chapter 7, and we will stop today after chapter 7. Red crash helmets and white jumpsuits. After the movies, Tom walked home with Billy. Tomorrow I'll roll the crawler in cornmeal and fry it like a trout. It's not really the taste, said Billy. It's just more the thought of it. When I start to eat it, even though it's smothered in ketchup and mustard and grated cheese, I just can't stop thinking worm. Worm, 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 worm. Gaggles of worms in bait boxes, drowned worms drying up on sidewalks, a worm squirming on the fish hook, the soggy end of a worm dragging out the dead fish's mouth, robins yanking worms out of a lawn. I can't stop thinking about worms. Yeah, but if I fry it in cornmeal, it won't even look like a crawler, said Tom. I'll put parsley around it and some slices of lemon, and then you can concentrate and think fish. All the time you're waiting in the barn, all the time you're eating it, keep saying to yourself, fish, 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 fish. Here I am eating good fish. Trout, salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Tuna, haddock, trout. Wait till you hear the minister shout. Fish, 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 fish. Shark, haddock, sucker, eel. I'll race my father in his automobile. Eel, flounder, bluegill, shark. We'll race all day till after dark. They can write a good poem. Billy cheered. Think how they'd all stare. I'd rev up the aisle, zip around the front pews, down a side aisle under the stained glass windows. My parents would kill me. Reverend Yardard peered down over the Bible stand. William, he'd cry. William, you take that engine thing out of here this very minute. Yeah, and then they'd come chasing out after us, said Tom. Billy laughed, waving their arms and yelling, and we'd lead them zigzag round and round and round and out among the gravestones and monuments in the cemetery, and then roar off down the Sandgate Road, leaving them draped over tombs, panting and shaking their fists. Hup, hup, yelled Tom, dancing around and boxing the air. And that Monday, we'd smuggle it into class disguised as Raymond Dwelly because he's so fat, and hide it in the coat closet. And then when Millie Butler said anything at all, even something like, excuse me, or even sniffed, we'd dump a whole bottle of ink over her head and run for the coat closet, overturning chairs and desks behind us to slow up Mrs. Howard. She'd come up after us, fumbling and shouting threats, and suddenly the doors of the coat closet would slam open and out we'd roar on our mini bike, in blood-red crash helmets and white jumpsuits, our scarves streaming out behind us, and we'd roar round and round the classroom while Mrs. Howard knelt among the overturned desks and chairs, sobbing helplessly into her hands, and then out the door and up the hill, thumbing our noses at the monitors, brackety-bracketery, brackety-brack, up the stairs, stiff-arming tacklers into Mr. Simmons' office, up onto his desk, boom, boom, a backfire into his face, and zoom out the window as he topples backward in his chair in a hurricane of quiz papers and report cards. And then crunch, landing on the driveway, we roar off down the highway to Bennington and join the Navy. So Mrs. Howard and Mr. Simmons and our parents can't punish us. These boys have quite an imagination. We are going to be on chapter 8 tomorrow. I hope you all have a great evening tonight, and I hope that your work is going well. Some of you have called me and asked for help. Call me anytime. I'm here to help. Love you all. Have a good night. Bye-bye.